Welcome back to Hot Mess Espresso, guys. We have one of the hosts of the Shakedown podcast with us, Ryan Forbes. Ryan, what is up?
Hi, Heather. How's it going?
Good, good. So we've already collaborated. I was on the Shakedown, which part one came out in March.
Yeah, part one just dropped. So when we're recording this episode, it came out
Yeah.
this Monday,
hmm
and we'll have part two in a couple weeks, and there's even a third part coming after that. So
Yeah.
basically all of March is going to be all of the parts that we did with you, and
Yeah.
it was a really great conversation. We
It
got into
was
a
a
lot of stuff.
fantastic conversation. It was definitely, I haven't done like a cold call podcast before. Usually I like plan it beforehand. So it definitely was different for me, but also it was so much fun just chatting with you guys and talking about mental health and the system and stuff like that, which I guess is basically this episode. And we can go kind of more in depth into all of that. So, what has your mental health journey been like before, and during, and after incarceration? Like, let's just start with before.
Before I had so for me I had I I was born with epilepsy, but it was a thing that was kind of I had a seizure from when I was born, and then I had a um growing up I was having seizures, but the
Mm-hmm.
whole time the doctors were like, well, we'll give it enough medication and it'll grow out of it, and that was the belief at the time. And then in college I started having seizures again,
Mm.
and then I had to go go find a neurologist and start getting on a medication that might help me deal with my seizures.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, we were able to find a medication that worked, but it took about a year to really kind of like on different medications. I one medication I ended up like gaining 25 pounds in a couple months,
Oof.
and it was like it was a mess, but we figured it out. We got one that actually made it so I wasn't having seizures anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But during that time, I was a freshman in college, and I wanted to hang out with my buddies and go out drinking and stuff like that, and I couldn't do that. I also
Right.
had to do the crazy thing in college, which was get 8 hours of sleep every night, which
That's a thing in
yeah,
college.
well, I had to figure out what the dosage was on this medication.
Oh
And
God.
yeah, and I actually tried to actively do it, and I had like with and like I was living in a neighborhood with like all these other students at the time, so there was
Mm-hmm.
parties going on nonstop, and I managed to do it, but I was also like the grumpiest kid on campus, um,
Yeah.
like avoiding all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so when we finally get the medication straight, I was like, well, can I drink now? Is it okay if I go and do these things? Doctor's like, yeah. So I took that as, well, I'm going to go buy a 30 pack of beer and just drink all of it and just go to town on it and make up for lost time.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be like,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't drink all the time, but that was kind of my attitude, was like, it was now becoming making up for lost time. Um, and which was really bad considering that both of my parents have dealt with addiction issues, and it was it was something that was in my family as well. And
Mm-hmm.
um so this so we went into so that ultimately, when I graduated college, that went into my career, and I turned my main addiction turned into working. And
Right.
like I was a computer scientist, and I was like always looking at, like, as soon as I'd get a job, I was already looking at the next job and how I was going to use that to advance what
Mm-hmm.
I was going to do next. And I it got so bad that I had moved away from like from my um from my family, from my friends. Um, I was I was divorced, I was on my own, and then I was just like not even caring about my health really as long as I could work
Mm.
and keep working. And then that was when um that was when I went like when everything was so bad and I was isolated enough. And I was going to therapy at
Right.
that point. I was
Mm-hmm.
going to a regular therapist and I was telling them like, occasionally I'll go out and I'll drink and then I'll just black out and I won't know where I am. Like, and they're like, the therapist was actually, oh, that happens. That happens sometimes. And, which, so I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess that will just happen from time to time.
Uh,
And, and
no.
I'll, yeah. And I'll just deal with that. But that ultimately led to like I was going to a happy hour and I knew that I could be a real lightweight and I was getting along with people, I was making friends and they wanted to do shot like people were like, Ryan, do some shots with us, do some shots. I knew I couldn't do shots because I'll black out, but I'm like, I want to hang out with these people and that's the
Right.
way you make friends. And I
Yeah.
blacked out. And even though I didn't drive to the bar, I ended up in my car in the blackout and then crashed into another car, which killed someone else and which ultimately led to dealing with the law on that end. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, I spent some nights in jail. My family immediately came and got me, and then they took me up to Colorado. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm still in my addiction mindset, which was I need to figure out how to get out of this. Like, how am I going to all right, what I need to do is basically come up with some sort of system so that no one can ever drive a car drunk again, and then the judge will have to like they won't be allowed to send me to prison.
Right.
That was kind of my thinking at the time, and my when I finally got back up to Colorado, my lawyer and my family were saying you should go to treatment. That's the best thing to help you look good for the judge.
Right.
And I was like, well, that I don't have time for that. Like I don't have time to do that if I'm going to like do my grand master plan to avoid prison. And they're like, well, I'm like, fine. They said go do that. And I will
Mm-hmm.
say, like I talked to I was working with Cedar here in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
which is the big treatment center here, and they're really great. And I called them and talked to them, and I said, "Look, like, so they're like, what are your issues with addiction?" I'm like, I don't think I have issues with addiction. And it's like I know what I did, and I
Mm-hmm.
totally admit that I was drinking and I caused this crash, but like I don't think I have issues with drinking. They're like, well, do you have issues with substance abuse? Have you ever had issues with that? And they're like, I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, sure. I've abused substances from time to time. Sure, I could say that. They're like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
well, we can help you with that. And then that helped with that got me in the door. That got me to listening, and it also because I couldn't do my big addiction plan, I actually was willing to listen when I came into
Right.
treatment, and that got me that was very helpful. And so I was supposed to only do 30 days of inpatient treatment. I ended up doing 90.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then from there, and then I moved from treatment directly to sober living right outside the treatment facility. And that's where I basically stayed for the first year until my sentencing at the end of the year and went straight from prison to prison from there, and there was 6 years of
Mm-hmm.
prison after that. And there's no mental health in there, as we discussed in the episode.
Yeah.
And and then I came out and I went. Fortunately, as part of like in Colorado, mental health is a big part of like probation and parole, so they try and make sure that you get hooked up with some sort of mental health treatment.
Right.
Um, but and then I found a really great therapist there, and then that's kind of that's who I still work with to this day.
Right. So I guess to kind of dive in, obviously you did 6 years, and we kind of went over it on your podcast, but um, for my people, when you say there's no mental health, is there literally no mental health whatsoever, or is there like a sprinkling of it, or what exactly are the realities of mental health treatment in prisons?
So there's different types of prisons. There's jails and there's
Jails,
prisons.
yeah.
Yeah, and then
There
so in
is a difference, guys.
right. So when you're most everyone's going to be in jails. When you first get touched by the system, you're going into a
Mm-hmm.
jail. And when you go into the jail, there may or may not be, I can't speak county to county what it looks like, but usually there's just not going to be anyone with any sort of mental health specialty. There's going to be um
Mm-hmm.
I there's going to be like a someone who hands out pills is basically the only person there with any sort of
Lovely.
specialty. And then um if you're on any prescription medication, you're probably going to have to fight tooth and nail to get that in there. And really, each jail, and I think it's statewide, but they have a list of prescriptions that they're going to carry at the jail and at the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And if your prescription is not on that list, or if it's like you don't use a generic, um,
Mm-hmm.
you're they're like for you to try and get that in, it's going to be extremely difficult. In fact, I don't even know how you would do it because, like, fortunately for my epilepsy medication, there was a generic version. But to give an example of how difficult it was to just get mine into a prison, they were the staff was demanding that they watch me have a seizure before they let me have my epilepsy medication.
That one just blows my mind. That
So,
just, oh my God.
yeah, they would have, and the funny part is they would have given me like Neurontin because that's was their default, Neurontin or Depakote because they carried it
Mm-hmm.
normally. But to have
Right.
zonisamide, which is the one that I use, and that after that year of trying out different things, we realized was the only thing that was going to work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they they were outright refusing, and this was with me telling them and with my mom and family on the outside, like constantly writing them and calling
Mm-hmm.
them on the phone, and they still weren't able to do it. And I don't know what finally did it. I think it had to do with me getting transferred up to a really small unit in the panhandle, and then finally I was able to get my medication. But it was extreme, and that was in a prison, and a prison is actually going to be easier than a jail because a jail they don't expect you to sit there as long as in a prison.
Right. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just stuff I got from my
Mhm.
college degree that I don't use. Jails are usually sentences of about a year or less. Prisons are, you're going to be there for a while.
Right. Prison, there's different types of prisons, and that also determines what kind
Mm-hmm.
of mental health um like facilities they have there.
Right.
There's the transfer facility, which is your 3 to 5 years you might be there, and then there's the ID units, which you're going to be there for a while, and then there's classification, which classification you're only expected to be there a week, so they won't even talk to you. So if you're having any sort of crisis, they're actually actively going to punish you if you show any signs during that week they expect to have you there. And of course, you could potentially go to a classification and then the whole unit get locked down. And if that happens, then you you're gonna be there longer than a week and you'd be stuck there.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so um, so basically the um at the transfer facilities, there was two main health carriers, Texas Tech and Texas A&M,
Mm-hmm.
and they they basically, most units don't really prepare to have any real mental health care.
Which
Like you, yeah,
boggles my mind because I feel like if there's one place to have mental health care, it would be in prison.
yeah, you would you would think
Like,
that you you would think so. My assumption after going to treatment, after going to sober living and all of this, and like
mm-hmm,
seeing and like really seeing all these people who were dealing with addiction, I was like, all right, when I go to prison, there's going to be 12-step meetings every day. There's going to be people, there's going to be counselors running around. There's going to be all this because I still had the treatment mindset running around in my head.
mm-hmm.
There are units that don't even have 12-step programs, period. Like 12-step programs only come to the units if volunteers from the outside are willing to come to the unit and regularly like go through security and make that program and make it available for inmates. And even then, the warden can just say no.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So to keep it as like personal as possible, what what was it like for you mentally, like, especially not having access to, especially when you were saying you were coming from like a treatment standpoint of, treatment, therapy, all of that. How was that those few years, just going from having people that wanted you to succeed in this, that, and the third, to an institution that doesn't care about you until you leave, and they don't even care about you then? Like, how was that mentally for you?
The fortunate thing was before I got locked up, a lot of people I wanted to find people who had been down before and who especially who had been in my situation before, which was actually very difficult. And they I asked
Mm-hmm.
them, I'm like, what can I expect? What should I prepare for? And they basically tried to tell me. They're like they didn't know what to tell me, but they told me like, look, just be ready to find to that like because I was like concerned like what about this, what about that, and they're like just they were kind of like just take care of yourself, make sure that you're watching out for yourself and looking out for yourself, be prepared. And they gave me a list of bad things including like you're going to end up fighting, like period, like you're going to you're going to end up in a physical fight, just be ready for it, it's going to happen, that's all. Like and
Literally, whether you started it or not, somehow you're going to get roped into one of those.
the the first time that like that issue came up for me was that my I got locked in a cell with this guy who had like several traumatic head events throughout his life. He
Mm,
was not um he was definitely not the brightest guy, and
mm.
he loved smoking Tucci, which is the synthetic marijuana that the
I think it's
like
K. Yeah, it's known as
K2,
K2
yeah.
now. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, that's still a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah,
It's
those are
still a
all
problem.
yeah. And the K2 they bring into the unit. He loved smoking it nonstop.
Mm,
And so um him and I didn't get along, and he also just he what he did, he loved like hanging out with the crowd that also smoked K2. What they
mm.
thought would be really funny is to see him and I fight. And like so his friends wanted to see it happen, and like he wanted to start like so that was the way that like kicked off.
Hmm.
And it was just his friends getting him riled up. There was no real reason other than his friends wanted to get it started, and then that trickled into leading leading us getting into it, and it was not,
Yeah.
it was just a mess. And I and And the problem with, so for me, those first years, and that was in the first year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, dealing with all of that, I was still in my like free world mindset of if I just follow the rules, I'm all like, and I do everything they tell me, and I just, if I just be a good person, like
Mm-hmm.
it'll all work out. And I just need to. I was still kind of in the. I need to hyper manage everything a little bit,
Yeah.
and I was actually, it was funny because after treatment, I'd gotten out of that. I'd gotten out of that mentality. I'd
Right.
really kind of learned how to let go. It'll be what it'll be. But then inside, I was really getting back into it because of that. Because it, it's scary. Like it's a
Yeah.
real change. It's really scary. And I see, and everyone around is trying to control whatever they can control because they can't control anything.
Yeah.
And um, so there was that, and then on top of that, I'm realizing that the rules were changing every time. Not only were the rules changing, but the rules like themselves, like the rules within for the cell block, and then an officer would have their own set of rules, and they would contradict each other, and so I couldn't follow the rules,
Yeah, there's no
or
stability.
right. And if I tried to follow the rules, like I was expecting to be there for 10 years, and I couldn't live 10 years without like cleaning my own clothes or um basically set like I'm trying to think of something like cleaning. You think cleaning your own clothes is, they'll give you clothes to clean, but no, you have to, if in Texas in the middle of summertime it gets over 100 degrees sometimes for months
Mm-hmm.
at a time, and the clothes that they give you is not thin cotton, it's like heavy rayon, and
Mm-hmm.
they're like painter's clothes, so you don't want to wear that. um and you're trying, so really you want to wear the thin cotton which you have to buy from the commissary, and somehow you're going to have to clean those, and you're going to have to like find some way to dry it, and if you put that on like the rusted iron that everything is, because everything's got exposed metal
Yep.
everywhere, um which is great if you're trying to just sit down. That's just going to, you're going to now take your white shirt and then it's going to be now covered in rust,
Mm.
and it's, yeah, that's like things like that. And there's also like things like just trying to go to the bathroom. There, one of my biggest freakouts in there was I could not, there was no way for me to go to the bathroom
Right.
after I got done with work, and they had shut down the bathroom in our in in the building, in the dorm, and then I couldn't, they wouldn't let me back in my cell, so I was just, there
Good
was
Lord.
nothing I could do.
Yeah, that's gotta weigh incredibly heavy on even somebody that doesn't already have mental health issues.
Yeah, and I've seen, one of the stories I always think about too is there's one guy I met when and like in my later years there, who he knew he had mental health issues. In fact, the reason he was
Mm-hmm.
there was because he did not know how to moderate his emotions, and he
Mm-hmm.
was, because of that he was very shy and kind of kept away from people, and he tried actively to get away, but you can't get away from people in a prison.
Nope.
And then on top of that, they put you, they house you with somebody, and it's pretty much random who they're going to house you with,
Mm-hmm.
and he's he's got mental health issues, so living with him is probably not going to be super easy. and
Mm-hmm.
and so the person, the general attitude for most guys in prison is, well, if you want to, like, if you're having problems with your cellie, then what you need to do is you need to straighten them out. You need to, show them who's boss and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
so one day, his cellie's got that attitude. He's like, next time you come in this cell, you'll know what time it is, and he's trying to,
Good Lord.
and his, the guy's trying to tell him through the bars, like, hey, look, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. Let's not fight. And the officer who's on the run's like, hey, it's count time. I need you to come over here. And guy's not listening to him. So he goes over to the guy with mental health issues who's at the bars. It's like, hey, you need to come over to count time. And he comes over to him. And then as soon as he touches him, the guy just flips out, breaks the clipboard over this old man. And they had to call officers. And then now,
Jesus.
like, then after that, he was sent to solitary on a maximum security unit.
Right.
And I can only imagine what solitary is going to do to him, or has done to him.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you deal? Like how this you couldn't talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't show emotions. Like how did you get through that?
Um, I had to. So one of the things I had to find, even early on when I had first, right after the accident and everything, I had to find out where I had to find a purpose. I had to figure out what I'm doing from here. Since before that, it
Mm-hmm.
was going to be my career, and I knew that was over. Um,
Yeah.
and I quickly realized that I did not want anyone to do what I had done. I did not want people to go down my path. I did not want
Mm-hmm.
people to experience, like, learn the way that I have been learning. So I what my focus became in prison was, I was going, and I also, when I knew that I was going to have years inside this place, I did not want it to be like just lost time. So I had to focus. I'm like, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to use this time productively and work towards that mission. So I tried, like, I um, spent a lot of times working on my sociology degree and um, working on my writing. And a lot of people, if you ask the guys who saw me in there, including like Dave and Malone, they would say, like, nonstop. Most of the time, when you saw me in there and I wasn't working, I would be just sitting on my bunk writing most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, and I would be writing. Um, I Whether it was essays for school or essays, like opinion pieces I was thinking about submitting, or
Mm-hmm.
stories for writing contests, or whatever. I was writing nonstop. And then I started working on different comics because I was, Malone encouraged me to get into those. I was working on so many different things to
Right.
try and go towards that purpose.
Yeah, for sure. You gotta try and keep your mind busy, I guess, as best you can. But the transition into the free world, I guess, or what do you guys refer to
Yeah,
it as?
yeah, the free world.
Civilian life?
Yeah.
I don't know. um, what was that like? And were you immediately like 1-800 find a therapist because Jesus Christ?
So, all right. So I missed the second part. It was, what was the transition in the free world like, and what was the second part?
What's up?
Nope.
Yeah, the sound's been cutting in and out this whole time. I was just like gonna edit out the pieces, and I'm just like trying to.
Right.
Your sound kept cutting out, but I knew enough of your story anyways that I was just like, no, this will be fine. So I could just be like, mm-hmm.
Oh,
Okay,
right.
so let's start this again.
Okay.
So the transition into the free world, civilian life, whatever you guys call it. What was that like? Was it kind of like a yes, finally, or was there kind of a little bit of a what do I do now? And did you immediately kind of 1-800 find a therapist?
No. So I will tell you, I had I probably had one of the craziest transitions into the free world.
Mhm.
And what I had, I will tell. Okay, so going into prison, one of the things that I had going into treatment is they had said over and over, when you are coming out of prison, your first things within the first 24 hours, you need to um, immediately go to find a, a 12-step group, get in the group, find your home group. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be your home group, but you need to find a group, go
Mhm.
in there, talk to someone, get some numbers, go do that. Which I was actually, when I was in treatment, right after treatment and during treatment, I'd gotten really good at. I was
Mhm.
Mr. Go out and get numbers and things like that. And so that was what I was picturing in my head. I figured my first 24 hours, as soon as I got out, going to a meeting, I was supposed to get out, be at my grandma's, who was right outside the prison where I was at in Texas.
Mhm.
And I was going to, I was like, I even had an idea of which group I was going to go to. It was all planned out in my head. Well, when I made parole, um, well, from the time that I applied for parole and the time that I got my decision, the pandemic hit.
Ooh.
And honestly, I don't think I would have made parole, especially with my charge and with it being the first time, if it were
Mhm.
not for the pandemic. So I was very
That's true.
fortunate, and I was very fortunate in that respect. But they gave me a program to complete. These
Mhm.
programs, and I cannot be more explicit about this, these programs are horrible. They are not helpful. If you have any
Hmm.
sort of mental health program or problem, you're you're probably going to fail, because they're not designed. Treatment is designed so that you learn something, get the tools you need, and then take them out into the real world so that you can use them and apply them, which was basically
Mhm.
what I was doing in prison. I had taken the tools in Cedar, was learning like mindfulness, I was learning meditation, and all things that I applied in prison.
Right.
And in this program, though, the program was like everything that had happened so far in prison, but now had amplified to 11 because the the staff and the officers all knew that we were going home. We were just waiting to leave.
Mm.
So where normally, if there's a problem, the inmates can like stand up for themselves, they'll riot, they'll make a big fuss.
Right.
They're like, well, we can be extra, like we can just make up rules on them, and they won't fight back because because these guys are going home. They're not going to fight back. They're going to
Right.
they're just going to take it. And they have to, because otherwise they'll fail the program and they'll lose their parole, and then they're going to have to spend years more in prison. Um so they would do things like come in at like 5 o'clock in the morning and say, all right, now everyone has to be fully dressed and out of bed. And if you're not fully dressed and out of bed, we're going to write you a case. And if you're not doing this, it's a case. And if you go into the day room, it's a case. And if you're not in the day room, it's a case. And if you're like, it's, and it would constantly,
Um,
yeah.
I got some
So
opinions on that I'm not going to express on this episode, but are you kidding me?
that, but that was the program. And so what I ended up doing during that time. So all this time, I like when I first got to the program, I had a comic that I was working on, and that became my sole focus. I went out to the day room every day, and I'd work on it all the time. But when the officers just started doing this more and more because they were supposed to be bringing the program back, like they were being lenient because of the pandemic. But then when
Right.
they were bringing the program back, I bought a whole bunch of food. I bought basically as much food as I could,
Right.
which is money that my family gave me.
Right.
And I bought a whole bunch of food, and I stayed in my bunk and read. I read as many books as I could. I
Mhm.
in that year, I had a count because I went on Goodreads when I got out. And I started putting in
Mhm.
all the books. It
I
was
love
something like
Goodreads.
150 books I read that year.
Holy
And
shit.
like, and probably about 75% were during that 8 months.
Yeah.
And, and I was I was just going through books like
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And people would hand me books and I'd read them. Like if it was a short book, I could read it in just a few hours and hand it back to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, that was nice being able to read, but I was doing it like trapped in the bunk, and I wanted to
Right.
exercise. I wanted to do it. But if they caught me exercising at the wrong time, and like they never let us out for rec, so it we weren't like, the only way to exercise was to hope that a good officer came on shift where we could kind of sneak some exercising in. So that was so anyway, all right, you're back to the question about being released. So I'm in this
No,
crazy
no, you're totally good. You are
yeah.
totally good. I'm just like irritated for you that just
So yeah.
yeah. Just
So
yeah.
I'm in a pandemic. I'm in this crazy program. Oh, also, this is during that time when Texas, decided, realized its independent energy bill, like energy idea, when it totally failed, and then everything froze.
Oh
Fortunately, the
yeah, I remember
prison,
that. And
yeah,
what's his name went to Mexico or Cancun or
yeah, Ted
Cancun's in
Cruz,
Mexico. Oh my God. Yeah, that guy.
yeah,
Just
Ted
decided to go
Cruz.
on vacation while the rest of his constituents are just like literally like freezing to yeah. Anyways, go on.
It was so cold. Just to give everyone an idea of how ridiculously cold it was during that time, they the ridiculous rule we had rules, like we had to walk with our hands behind our back, we had to walk on certain paths even though it was longer to get to the chow hall. They would walk us on these ridiculous paths to get to the chow hall in
Mm-hmm.
this manner. We had to look straight forward. It was so cold that they said, no, just however you can get to the chow hall, do it, because we've already watched too many inmates like hurt themselves on the ice, and we can't have any more inmates hurt
Yeah, no
themselves on
shit.
ice. So they're like, if you need to run through the grass, do it. And so I was like, all right,
You
well,
know it's
was
bad when Texas is like, go for it.
right.
Like, yikes.
So so we so after all that, I'm my like, so we're in a pandemic, and my 90 or my 88-year-old grandma at the time was like, you know uh she's like, Ryan, you've already had COVID twice now. I don't think you can stay with me.
Ugh.
And I'm like, fair point, but
Right.
how?
It's valid, but
I'm like, how? But and then I've got to figure out what to do now. Well,
right.
fortunately, I found out the reason I was going to stay with her is like, I didn't think I could do an interstate compact to Colorado, but we found out I could do an interstate compact while in prison, and a lot of guys who were in my group were doing it. The only problem was is it was going to keep me
Mm-hmm.
in the program longer, and I was like, but I did it, and so I was going, when I finished the program, I was going to directly to Colorado. It really
Mm-hmm.
didn't hold me up that much, but I I so the way it worked is, when I got done, they basically go, they get you, your family can bring you clothes. So my family brought me some clothes. Um, they brought me clothes. You get dressed. They walk you out the door. My mom's waiting out there. I get in the car, and and my mom is not the greatest driver. And she's like driving like a bat out of hell to get to the airport. And then I go from prison to the airport during COVID, with like this is like just like
Right.
airports opened up to everyone, so there's a lot, like it's still lines and everything and all that kind of stuff. Everyone's wearing masks, but there's a guy playing at the piano bar now, and I was like, this is a lot of things happening right now.
Right.
And going to the airport, and then flying to Colorado, and then going back with her. So that was all in 24 hours
That's a lot.
happening. Yeah. So a lot of things right there. And then caught up with parole and probation. They're like, they recommended a therapist. And within a week I had a therapist, which it seems like now, like everyone does therapy remote. And that's kind of what I've been doing. Is just remote
I
therapy.
also have a remote therapist and I love it.
Yeah, it is really nice. Like it is a lot more
Mm-hmm.
convenient. And then once I found, it took me a few tries, but now I've got a really good therapist that I'm all about,
You,
and is
yeah,
yeah.
you do wind up shopping around for a therapist just to get like the right feel for sure. I think I've
Right.
had 4 or 5 total, and granted, a lot of um, the issues were like one found a new job, one went on maternity leave, one had a medical issue, one left private or public practice and went to private. So like, but yeah, you do wind up shopping around for a therapist a lot, and I think people don't realize that. They're just like, oh god, therapy didn't work for me. I didn't like the therapist I was with. I was like, then find a new one, because you have to
Right.
shop around to find somebody that gets you. That
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's like you feel like you're in therapy, but you also feel like you can sit down on the couch and be like, well, let me tell you about this week. Like,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't feel like therapy, but it is therapy kind of thing. You just have to find that person that you like really vibe with, or that, that kind of thing. But yeah, to kind of switch gears a little bit, your podcast.
Okay.
Like what what started it? What made you want to? Because I mean, it is a wealth of knowledge, obviously, from
Thank you.
a very expert standpoint. But what made you, and like to give like a little bit of a synopsis, the Shakedown is your podcast with two other guys. That it's an incredible podcast. I will say so myself, and I mean I'm a little biased because I was on it, but it is an incredible podcast. Um, that talks about the inner workings of the system, and what inspired you to be like, let's go back down memory lane every week.
Well, so I listened to podcasts since like 2005 was when I was
Mm-hmm.
started listening, and there weren't a whole lot of options. But
Right.
I always liked podcasts, and I always and when I got locked up, I when I was thinking about things I wanted to do when I got out, the podcast was always in the back of my mind. That was something I thought about, especially
Mm-hmm.
when I was hearing the guys' stories, when I was hearing about what was when I just realized that I had no idea how this thing worked. Like going into it, I had
Mm-hmm.
no idea about how courts worked. I had no idea about how punishment worked. I had no idea about how the prisons worked. And um I I was trying to research it
Mm-hmm.
beforehand, and I still had no idea. So I felt like we there needed to be some voices talking about this place in a way that explained how it worked. The other aspect of it is that because I went from treatment to prison, I understood that treatment and prison are similar. They both take you out of society, and and the goal is something bad has happened,
Mm-hmm.
and something needs to be done about it. The
Mm-hmm.
difference is that in prison, the whole point is the staff, the mission there is we need to keep you out of society, and we're going to teach you obedience to anyone, like blind obedience to anyone in a uniform. Whereas in
Right.
treatment, the whole idea is we want you back in society, but we need to teach you the skills you need to be not just back in society, but at your peak, to have more skills than the average person in society.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, mindfulness is a useful thing. Mindfulness, meditation, understanding where
Right.
your emotions are and everything. Like these skills are useful for everyone, but
Right.
but like because you have a crisis, it brings it all to the front. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and so um, being able to access them actually gives you an advantage. And I feel like it should be anyone who goes and really listens and takes advantage of the skills should be at an advantage.
Right.
Um, so part of the goal of the podcast was one, it's telling people about it, about the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm.
It's also bringing some humanity, so you get to hear personal stories and not
Right.
hear you. It's one thing if I go through and I just explain, well, this is how the thing works, blah 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 blah. I've watched TED talks on it,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had friends and stuff like watch come in and like they'll see me as I'm watching TED talks and like, wow, that sounds really boring,
Yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, I don't want that. I want
Right.
you like just and it's also one thing like when I say, well, it's one thing if I say, well, there's slavery in prison. It's another thing if you meet the people who are there and you go, oh yeah, and by the way, they're working in the fields. Like then it all of a sudden clicks. Like,
Right.
oh,
It's like
and
a
it's
face
like
to a name kind of thing.
right. And so those are that was I felt like a big part of it too. And then the and then bringing to it the idea of okay, and bringing in we need to these are ways that we can talk about changing it too, because we have lots of times
Yes.
where we talk about how do we change this and how really ultimately everyone can change it just by realizing, hey, no matter how whatever horrible thing this person did, they're a person, they've affected a whole bunch of other people, and all those people, everyone in this circle needs help, and we need to
Yep.
figure out how we help all of them.
Now, do you feel like your podcast helps like family and friends better understand the system, especially if they have someone incarcerated and the whole system just feels very confusing?
I Yes, I feel like there's a lot of times where, especially if you've got family and friends who are dealing with it, I would have loved to have something like the podcast so they could have like an understanding. It still might be a little abstract, kind
Mm-hmm.
of being like because it's still hard until you're there, but then
Right.
to understand sometimes these issues. One of the big things is Malone has talked a few times about this one really powerful story where the staff like lied to his family, and like they kept lying to his family, and meanwhile he's they're telling him he can't get a degree or whatever because he's skipping class. He's not skipping class. He's in medical because gangs are attacking him. and,
Yeah.
and it's like it's stories like that are going that like you can't understand. Like it's one thing for like someone to say they will lie to your family, but then to have an actual example where they just
Yeah.
outright like were something really really awful was going down and they denied access. It's hard, and it's even my family has gone through it too many times, and it's hard for people newly in the system. Their families want to trust the people they're on the phone with,
Mm-hmm.
and the people on the phone will be super sweet to them and lie right to their faces.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what this does is, like you said, it humanizes people that are in there, but also gives the reality of it because, you grow up and you think like prison's where all the bad people go. And if you're in prison, you're a terrible person. And I'm positive there are people that deserve to be in there for a very long time and should not be among society. But 9 times out of 10, it is people that made a stupid fucking judgment call and wound up in there. And that, and you're also bringing the realities of how shitty and, dare I say, corrupt at times it is in there, because that's not something that we just openly talk about. Like, you see it on shows and stuff and you're like, okay, but like, that's a TV show. No, that's actually what happens.
It's it, it's hard because like there's when with each case you have like even for the really like the people who are really they have to be outside of society. For me, I look at it
Mm-hmm.
as that's like that's like a mental health problem that we haven't even solved yet. Like, and we
Yeah.
can't we aren't even trying to solve it because we're not even looking at it. We're not looking at
Right.
the issue, and we're not looking at what this thing is. And so if we don't look at it, then for to me, if you're a victim of this person who has hurt you, and we just said, hey, we either we put them away for a really long time or for
Mm-hmm.
life, or B, we're going to kill them back. And which to me, now there's kind of you're putting blood on our hands as society, or blood on like the victim's hands, which is not fair. That's not, and it's not healing. The healing would be getting the person who did what they did to understand what they did, the impact of what they did, and
Right.
making it known. And there are ways to do that, and we're not even trying to do that. There, there were so many times in my case where I wanted to reach out to the victim, and I honestly, if they wanted to spend all day and tell me all of the horrible things they did, awesome, would love it,
Mm-hmm.
would love to. I wanted them to get that stuff out on me, but there was no space for that. That wasn't a
Right.
place where they could. There was no place for that in this whole process, and I feel like
Right.
that's a big part that's missing, and also giving them a voice and a choice in what they could do,
Right.
and what my punishment or what my way to like make an amends to them could have been. And
Right.
I feel like everyone that a big thing missing from this whole process.
Right. No, no, I totally get that. And I guess to clarify, when I'm talking about like that 1 out of 10, I'm talking like the Ted Bundys and the John Wayne Gacy's of the world, that, they, maybe some intervention could have helped them, but I think from what, there's just some people that just enjoy inflicting like just harm among people, and I guess the jury's out on whether they're redeemable, but you would hope that they would be, but I don't
It's
know.
it yeah, it's
It's such a complicated, open-ended discussion.
right. And I it comes down to one of my favorite subjects to study leading up to all this was philosophy. And in philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
one of the Socrates' biggest thing was that no one who is fully aware of themselves would be a criminal. And the way
That's true.
like so and the way they he understands that is if you hurt someone in your community, you're in effect hurting yourself. So if you're
Yeah.
fully aware of yourself, then you would never hurt someone in your community. It just
Right.
devalues. It's just like going to your neighbor's house and then, ruining their lawn. Now you just devalued your house by doing
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah. That's actually a really good way to look at it. I didn't think of it that way. That's See, I'm learning something now. Because yeah, I mean, maybe they weren't. I don't know. It's such an open ended. The world will never know, because obviously they're not alive to see if they could have been tweaked a little.
Right.
But I don't think that the way that we're going about it, even in putting them away, is helping anything.
Right. And yeah, we haven't that's the thing is we never tried. We never
That is
tried.
true.
And I'm not saying that we know all and can fix all at this point. Like I said, there are people who they they might not ever be able to like like they might cause harm in society. I
Mm-hmm.
totally get that. But right now we don't have a moral way of even judging that. We don't have a way of saying, okay, if
True.
this person is causing that, can we put them in, like, can we work with them, try and find a way so they might be able to go back out into society and figure that out. But we're not even trying that. What we're doing is
Mm-hmm.
we have a place where the mission is keep them out of society, and just try it. Like, there's, in Texas at least, the overwhelming tone was you need to obey, like like basically if you go up to an officer and that officer says the sky's green, you'd say, okay, yes, officer, and then you go 5 feet and the next one says the sky's red, and or the one you go over to the next officer and they say it's purple. You have to find some way to appease all of them, and you have to say
Mm-hmm.
yes to all of them. If one says jump and the other one says stay still, you're gonna have to find some way to appease them both at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's that was the overwhelming lesson of prison. And what you end up learning is, well, how do I sneak around all of these officers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like our system is very lock them out of society and then dump them back on society. Sometimes worse than when they went in
Yeah.
because of how the system is. It just breeds violence and this, that, and the third. So it's almost like you have to work 2 to 3 times as hard to get back to the person you were before you went in.
Well, that's, I mean, here's one thing too, is that when you inside of a prison, all of you can't solve problems the way you would outside.
Nope.
If you and I have a problem, we can talk to each other, try and work it out, see
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, see what we, come to some sort of agreement and compromise. In
Mm-hmm.
prison, if two people have a disagreement, now it becomes a power play. It becomes, if someone concedes, they're now showing weakness, and that weakness can now be capitalized by other inmates. So
And that's
now,
not how that works in the real
right,
world.
exactly. So what guys coming out of prison, they now take that same attitude and bring it into the real world, and then they never concede, and they try and show force and all of these other things, which are not going to help them
No.
actually out in the world. And sometimes too, a lot of times, like, they'll say, well, we rehabilitate inmates by giving them certain skills and things like that. Okay, sometimes, yeah, sometimes there are vocational schools. I did some of those are great. But like, sometimes, like, the highest paying job across prisons in the US is firefighting. Prisoners can't be firefighters when they get out, period.
Hang
And
on,
the high
repeat that one more time. So the highest paying
okay,
job?
the highest paying job in prisons in the United States, which is at $2 an hour, by the way, is firefighting. And prisoners can't be firefighters when they get out.
That just that one threw me when you told me that. Well, I know they can't
Yeah.
because the felony or just having done prison time. But yeah, you spend your life risking your life for $2 an hour and you get really good at it and then you get out and they're like, nah.
And I mean, these California fires, these Canadian wildfires, inmates were fighting all of those.
Oh yeah.
And they were doing a lot of the work. And I mean, the idea that they would get turned down when they get out is, to me, that's insane. That you would want, if they want to do it, they should be able to do that.
Yeah,
And
especially when you had no problem with them doing it before,
right.
And I think that's a whole other podcast episode that we could do on like this, just how fucked it is having a felony on your record and all of a sudden all these doors are just like boom, 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 boom. Like we could
Right.
absolutely do an entirely different podcast episode on that, because that is also, okay, my knee. That's also something that, is not That needs to change for sure.
Absolutely. And there's the and I actually I just thought about this. One of the most inmates, one way or another, work in the farm industry in Texas. They work out in the fields, they pick vegetables, they pick
Mm-hmm.
fruits, um they work in the fields. But for them, unless they owned a farm before they went into prison, um there's no way they would be able to own a farm when they get out and be able to use any of the skills that they learned out there.
I Yeah, yeah. The entire system is just a mess, and we've talked about it. We talked about it on your podcast that the only way to change that is to start getting real annoying with your local
Right.
politicians, your local change makers, or even just running for the change yourself, because otherwise this is just going to be the same old for all time, if not probably get worse at some point, more likely than not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just got done. I was over at University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and we were doing a bunch of talks at the college, and this was the thing that kept coming up is like, what can we do? What could an individual person do to actually change it? And it sounds like it's not much, and it sounds like it's really simple and kind of cheesy, but really, if you start thinking as like when you start feeling that little nagging, um, throw that person in jail, or that person needs to be locked up, or this person like uh, that person is just crazy. Any one of those things, if you just stop right there and be like, okay, let's assume no, let's try something else. Let's remember that this person is a person,
Mm-hmm.
and not only are they a person, they have a family, and they didn't they weren't making great decisions. There's a
Mm-hmm.
whole gamut of people who just got hurt in this. So, who got hurt? Who needs help? And what would actually help? And what is the solution being offered? Prison in general doesn't solve any of those problems. It's not
Nope.
really helping the victims. It's not helping the person who caused it and help like preventing that from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
It's not solving any of the big problems to like keep everyone safe, really, at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day. So why don't we like so instead of doing that, why don't we try and do something that actually shows that we're trying to keep everyone safe, and even have like if we had a place where people could go and actually get these skills, maybe before they acted, they would go there first and
Right.
actually choose to go to this place and remove themselves from society when something happens, because you're not going to voluntarily go to prison, but you might
No.
voluntarily go to treatment, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a big difference.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm a huge advocate for treatment, for sure. I feel like
I
that actually does
Going to
more. And
treatment,
just from your
I
story
highly
alone,
recommend
treatment
to anyone, and
probably.
it's there's treatment for trauma, there's treatment for um addiction, there's treatment for all sorts of things, and there's a lot I've heard of lots of
Mm-hmm.
great treatment facilities all over the country, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, just from hearing your story, I feel like treatment may have possibly like saved your existence, because that gave
Absolutely.
you the tools to get through your sentence and then do your best to be a functioning human being on the outside, for
Yeah,
sure.
I can't imagine going to prison before treatment. If I'd gone
Oh
in
god.
there with the
Yeah.
attitude that I had, if they had just left me in jail and then I had to do my time that way, I could have easily gotten sucked into the mindsets that a lot of guys have
Mm-hmm.
in there. I wouldn't have been keeping track of what was going on with me. I would have gotten, I could have, um, what really happens to a lot of guys and it ends up like dissociating them from reality, is they get this resentment, like this resentment towards the world. And then,
Mm-hmm.
which, fair, like it's bad, it's really bad in there. So like
Yeah.
you're and if you sit there and you're just like, I hate that, like this is, you know, like these officers and these guys in here don't know what they're doing. They're just a bunch of loud youngsters and blah, 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 blah. And it just eats away at you until you're not even here. All you are is resentment. And
Mm-hmm.
I could have totally seen myself going down a path like that. And then instead of making a podcast, or like where I'm talking about like these are people stories and what can we do from here, it would be, let's talk about all these jerks, blah blah blah, and going from that.
Well, you could even possibly be back,
Yeah, absolutely. It's
honestly. I mean, it's so the I just the recidivism rate is so high, and it makes so much sense when you're
it, the
looking at the
recidivism
culture
rate
inside there, and
is
then
super
throwing them back
high,
into the free
and
world, and then
it's,
going,
yeah.
yeah, now you have to like, yeah, it's just it's insane. But I could literally talk to you forever about this because I mean I have a whopping 2 year degree and like a 1 day tour at the local county jail, but it's definitely something that I'm passionate about, and I feel like we need to have more conversations about this because, just like I'm humanizing people with borderline, you're humanizing people that have done time. And they're not literally the same thing, but we're both working our asses off to cure a stigma.
Right.
And it's a lot of fucking work. But honestly, I love what you and David Malone are doing. It is beyond important work. And I am so fortunate and so blessed to have literally stumbled across you guys on Facebook.
I thank you so much. Yeah, and I really I love the work you're doing on here too. It's amazing. It's like I said, it's removing a giant stigma, and I'm impressed by it, and it's amazing work. Thanks so much for having me on, Heather.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. This has been awesome. We'll definitely see you again.
That'd be great.